All right, this is the third web lecture, although it's a little bit out of order, that I'm going to give on intimate partnerships from chapter 15. So this is both symbiosis, predation, and other ways in which plants and animals and fungi live with and microbes live with one another. So all species exist in a web of interactions with other organisms. And this picture of a zebra on the Serengeti plain suggests that. The grass that they predominantly eat, the ticks and the oxpeckers, which may feed on them, the viruses, bacteria, and not pictured here, but fungi that live in their intestines and on their surface, integral parts of their microbiome, may in some cases cause diseases. Lions, one of their main predators, as well as likely leopards and hyenas. So, and then other herbivores, such as antelope or giraffes or elephants, they coexist with them on this plane. So coevolution is the reciprocal evolutionary change between interacting species, driven by natural selection. So each species in a coevolutionary relationship is going to exert selection pressure on the others, influencing their evolution. And your text in chapter 15 has a nice diagram of the range of interactions that species can have with one another. Much of this should be review from ecology for you, although there may be some different interactions here. And ultimately, these are something that can and do evolve. And for it to evolve, it requires genetic variation in among individuals. So in parasitism by wasps, there can be a lot of variation in how susceptible individuals are to these parasitoids. Species introductions provide nice examples of how genetic variation can fuel rapid evolution. The introduction of the balloon vine has affected soapberry bugs both here in Florida as well as in Australia. And in northern Australia, in the Northern Territory, where there's more variation in them, they've evolved much more so that their mouth parts match the introduced balloon vine much better. While in eastern Australia, where there's less genetic variation, beak-like has not evolved nearly as much. One thing that's clear is that the strength of reciprocal selection in many coevolutionary dynamic systems varies geographically. So in Drosophila and one of its pathogens, there's clear evidence of both variation and resistance in both partners, as well as in differences in strength of selection. And both are needed to understand these geographic dynamics. Anytime one can select on this, it indicates there's genetic variation. What likely happens in many coevolutionary dynamics is that there's a geographic mosaic. So in some places, selection is strong on both species, while in others it's weak or may only be present in one of the species. And coevolution is not simply limited to two partners. If a predator attacks a whole group or guild of species, it may switch from predominantly attacking one to another. And this can drive evolutionary dynamics in all of these species. In nest in catbirds and cuckoos, birds that place their eggs into the nest of other birds, there can be strong coevolutionary dynamics, as the egg has to essentially match that of the bird species that's parasitizing. So changes in egg color may be quite important, and it can cause coevolutionary dynamics, strongly selecting for differing egg color in cuckoos or catbirds. In dynamics with pathogens, where being able to enter cells is important, there can be strong coevolutionary arms races on amino acid changes at different receptors, particularly on nuclear membranes. Your book has a nice description of coevolutionary dynamics between western newts and the common garter snakes that affect them, with differences in the levels of expensive to make it to trototoxins across Western North America. There are a number of systems where virulence of pathogens has been observed to go down. In Australia, with its invasive rabbits, a virus that was introduced to kill off the rabbits quickly lost virulence and became much less effective as a biological control agent. And this is in part because the pathogen was so effective at killing rabbits that entire populations were decimated and the pathogen couldn't spread. So strains that were less virulent were more effective at spreading. So natural selection on many pathogens can select for this. There's some evidence that flu viruses have also undergone this sort of selection. But an important dynamic in this is how the pathogen is spread. In many cases, making a host sick is essential to spreading the pathogen. So many of our human diseases require making one ill to be spread. And the way we congregate people in hospitals may increasingly favor this. This geographic mosaic also applies to mutualisms. So often pollinators and the plants on which they depend for nectar or pollen to feed on, they vary dynamically across space with one another, and often they're not simply two species, but many species interacting with one another. Müllerian mimicry, where all of the individuals, such as the butterflies, match a pattern so that they all benefit from the protection given by having a toxic-looking form. These often vary dynamically across regions where all of the members of the Müllerian mimic look the same in one spot, but in a different location they may look different from one another. This has been well studied in the genus Heliconius with butterflies that are Müllerian mimics. And in this group, the genetic basis of mimicry has been uncovered, where there's a single gene that is involved in part of forming this mimicry. And it looks like transfer of this gene between distantly related species through rare hybridization has been critical to forming sort of geographically clustered mimic complexes among multiple different Heliconius species. Another well-studied mutualism is that of figs and their wasps that pollinate them. Figs are an unusual flower in that the flowers are actually on the inside of the fruit and develop there, and the wasp enters the fig and eats some of the developing flowers and develops in it, and in the process pollinates the rest of the fig. And then the whole fruit with its seeds inside is dispersed. And you're often, although in cultivated figs this isn't the case, in wild figs you're eating the wasp larvae as well as the fruit. This is a obligate mutualism. The fig can't live without it, can't be pollinated without its wasps, and the wasps are only able to live in the fig. And part of what maintains this mutualism is that the fig host can sanction or punish wasps that aren't good mutualists, that don't pollinate its flowers, and basically kill off the whole developing fig and the wasps inside if they don't pollinate its flowers. So this punishing is essential to this relationship. It maintains it as an evolutionarily stable strategy for both partners. So some of the key concepts here are that the intensity and specificity of coevolutionary interactions can vary geographically and over time, space and time. Antagonistic interactions may involve frequency-dependent selection that can maintain genetic variation. And predator populations or partner populations, mutualist populations, can switch prey or host, generating alternating bouts of pairwise interactions that can drive evolution in whole groups of species. So this can lead to something called an evolutionary arms race when antagonistic interactions or mutualistic interactions lead to directional selection on each species. The strongest of these interactions may become less antagonistic over time, such as in Australian rabbits. And when mutualistic species exert positive frequency-dependent selection, rapid coevolution can occur as a result. Many mutualisms are vulnerable to cheating, and those that are the longest standing often have these mechanisms by which sanctions or punishments can occur. Many cases of diversifying coevolution or adaptive radiation involve accelerating divergence between populations. This can happen when, say, a bird focuses on different potential food sources, such as seeds of conifer trees, and depending on the shape of particular trees, may end up with different beak shapes as a result of that. Plants may evolve innovations to escape predation or herbivory by different, particularly insects or other herbivores, such as these caterpillar beetle larvae. And this can lead to radiations among plants as they develop different poisonous chemicals that defend them from one host, and then a host may develop resistance to that new toxin and become specialized on that plant host. So this has long been thought to lead to much of the diversity we see in plants and their herbivores. It's a classic paper from the mid-60s by Paul Ehrlich and Peter Raven, where the term coevolution was coined, that develops much of this thinking. These radiations of host and partner, whether it's a positive or a negative partner. So when Haldane, the great early 20th century evolutionary biologist, was asked what insight his study of evolution gave to creation, he suggested that biology teaches us that the Creator had an inordinate fondness for beetles. Most animal species are beetles. They account for, I believe, nearly 25% of all animals. And this diversity is strongly linked to plants. Beetles eat all parts of plants and all types of plants, and as plants have diversified, beetles have diversified with them. So there's very strong evidence that beetle diversity really follows that of plants, and that they've radiated not just to eat one part of all plants, but to eat different parts of a great many plants, be it stem or leaf or flowers. And usually you can find, if you've got a plant, you can find 5 or 6 or more beetles that eat different parts of it. There are nice examples from orchids where deception, where requiring a male wasp or bee to pollinate the orchid, thinking that it's a female wasp, this has driven a lot of diversity in orchids. And this is in part because male wasps don't want to be wasting their time pollinating an orchid. So there's rapid evolution going on between the orchid and the wasp on whether or not it recognizes it. Human activities which have moved plants and animals to new places shows that these dynamics can be interrupted with the introduction of new species, such as new predators that may cause mutualisms to break down and can lead to the disappearance of more than just one organism. An example that's not in your book is that of the dodo in Mauritius. When the Dutch arrived and hunted out the dodo, all of a sudden all of the trees no longer reproduced. And there's some thought that many of the fruits of trees on Mauritius had evolved to be eaten by the dodo. And when the dodo went extinct, the way its crop, its essentially digestive tract, broke down fruits, no longer caused germination of the trees that had evolved to have the dodo disperse them and cause germination of their seeds. So coevolutionary interactions can increase biodiversity with genetic diversity diverging, causing divergence in a geographic mosaic. And many specialized mutualisms make species dependent on one another, so the extinction of one may lead to the extinction of the others. So there are some specialized forms of mutualism, such as endosymbionts, where one organism lives in another. Many insects that live on plants, such as aphids or leafhoppers, have diets that are very skewed. They can be almost all sugar with no amino acids that are essential for building proteins. As a result, bacteria that live inside these organisms are essential to creating a diet that the aphid or leafhopper can live on. And study of these systems suggests that many of these endosymbioses are quite old and are shared across groups, where one sees that both the insect and the bacteria inside it have diverged with one another, with only a few cases where the phylogenies of the endosymbiont and the host are not congruent with one another. Even in less non-mutualistic associations, such as lice and the animals on which they live, show that usually such intimate parasites also have largely congruent phylogenies with their host. Perhaps the most important endosymbiont are mitochondria, which live inside all multicellular animals, with one or two exceptions such as Giardia and Rickettsia. And this is the ancient consumption and then derivation of one bacteria into another, leading to mitochondria being inside most plant, animal, and fungal cells. There's been, since this endosymbiotic event, massive transfer of genes from the mitochondria into the nuclear genome of plants, animals, and fungi, such that the mitochondria has been for hundreds of millions of years, has been unable to live outside of its host because most of its genes have been transferred to the genome of its host. In plants, there's a second critical endosymbiotic event where a photosynthetic algae was taken up by the ancestor of green and red algae. This photosynthetic bacteria has also lost much of its genome to its plant or red algal host and given rise to both land plants, marine green algae, and a range of photosynthetic protozoans. So mitochondria and plastids are both endosymbiotically derived bacteria that have extensively co-evolved with their host, so that both the host and the endosymbiont are completely dependent on one another, share extensive genetic regulatory networks, and are fascinating parts of our evolution. We have more than just this endosymbiont, though. Much of our genome is not really human DNA, but is that of dead retroviruses that have at various times in the past proliferated throughout our genome. And a substantial part of any eukaryotic genome is retroviruses and other transposable elements, selfish genetic elements that co-evolve in many cases quite rapidly and quite importantly in their host genome. So these endogenous retroviruses and other mobile genetic elements, or transposable elements, have co-evolved extensively with host genomes. And this is a topic to develop at another time, and thank you.